Hello and welcome to episode 2 of series 4 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Greg Smith from The Big Picture People. I hope you have an absolutely fantastic start to 2023. We got some great feedback on the last episode. If you haven't listened to it already, episode 1 of Series 4, we had an interview with Mark Gallagher from Performance Insights Limited. And Mark was telling us all about his experience working in motorsport and in particular in Formula One. And he was telling us all about the day-to-day challenges of communicating and leading in that sort of environment. And we had some really great comments from our posts on LinkedIn about that particular episode. So if you've not had a chance to listen to that one, I strongly recommend you go back to it. It was really, really good. Even if you're not interested in motor racing or Formula One, I think you'll find that really interesting from a high performance, high-paced environment, how some of the day-to-day challenges that leaders and managers face in those organizations. So looking forward to our future episodes. In a couple of weeks, on the 31st of January, I've got an interview with Shara Roman from Silverine, who's going to be telling us all about something called the conscious workplace. Very much about how we can create a workplace that is consciously designed and geared towards employee engagement. Really interesting conversation that I had with Shara, which we recorded a few weeks ago. And then after that, on the 14th of February, I have an interview with Amy Wong from Always on Purpose. And Amy is going to be telling us all about the importance of trust in our communications, a very important topic, particularly given the current world that we live in, where trust seems to be a very rare commodity indeed. And that's just the first of our interviews for this series. We've got some brilliant interviews to come up. I'm really excited about the episodes that we've got coming up for you. On the note of as I said, we got some really great feedback on the previous episode. If you do hear an episode and you find it really useful and you think anyone else might benefit from it, please share it with them. It really helps us. Even after all these episodes that we've put out, we're getting up into the 90s now with the amount of episodes that we've put out. It's always great to be able to reach out to new people. Our shows, if you've not already been through, if you may have been a loyal listener all the way from the start, or you may have just picked up on the podcast, we've got over 90 episodes now, or 90. This is the 90th episode. Lots of episodes covering lots of range of topics, evergreen topics that will be things that I'm sure will be useful for you, even if we recorded them a couple of years ago. So feel free to go back, but also feel free to bring any new listeners to the show as well. Just the final thing from me before I move on to this episode's interview. This week, if you're listening to this in real time, in a couple of days, actually, we're running another one of our webinars. We're running a webinar all about health and safety communication. So if any of you have got responsibilities for health and safety comms, or if you're working in an organization where you've got colleagues who are responsible for that, might be worth steering them towards it. It's on Thursday this week, the 19th of January, and it's a free webinar. It's at 3 p.m. in the afternoon UK time, and it's all about how we can transform the way that we communicate health and safety to our colleagues in a much more engaging way, less likely to send them to sleep, as unfortunately many health and safety communications can be. So if you're intrigued by that, go along to our website, thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. If you go to the events tab at the top of the page, you'll see there are a couple of events listed there. And if you can't make that date, we've got a number of dates in the future. We tend to alternate. We have that run that particular webinar every 2 months, alternating each month, and that alternates with another webinar that we run, which is all about sharing the big picture with your people. So if you have a look at either of those webinars, you might find interesting. They're both free and both at 3 p.m. UK time on various different dates. Anyway, I'll be quiet now and move on to today's guest. Before the pandemic, remote working was the preserve of a few people who were lucky enough to be able to work from home, or maybe their jobs entailed that they worked virtually from their office. But obviously post-pandemic now, remote working is something that we're all much more familiar with. It's something that we've probably all done at some point. Obviously there are some jobs that isn't conducive to working remotely, but more and more people now are working remotely. And as we move into and sustain and continue with this remote working world, it's really important that we think about how we communicate with people. It's very easy just to carry over what we've done in the past. So endless Teams meetings and Zoom meetings seems to be one of the things I'm hearing people complaining about at the moment. And also not a great use of emails and instant messenger and some of the technology that's become available to us. So I wanted to explore what are some of the modern challenges that we have now with remote working, and particularly communicating with remote workers. And that brings in the topic of synchronous and asynchronous communications. Synchronous being where we're communicating to people in real time, whether that's virtually or face to face, and asynchronous being where it's on demand, where we're sending out our messages for people to consume at a time when they choose and in a way which they choose. And I think understanding the difference between those two differences between synchronous, asynchronous, and synchronous communications is really important for communicators and internal communicators to be able to do, and to recognize that each of those has its place. And for remote workers, that's different to what it would have been when people were working in a fixed location. So that's what we're going to be looking at in this episode. We're going to be exploring what is synchronous and asynchronous communication, and what are some of the ways that we can improve the way we use them, and in particular in the context of supporting our workers who are working remotely. So I hope you find this a useful and interesting interview. My guest today is Joanna Parsons. Joanna is a remote working enthusiast with a passion for developing internal communication strategies that help to deliver on business goals. Joanna is also a fellow of the Institute of Internal Communications with over 10 years of experience in internal communications. As Regional Director for Ireland with the Institute of Internal Communications, Joanna has been elected to the Board of Directors. Joanna is also the proud winner of 4 awards for outstanding internal communications, including first place in the prestigious Public Relations of Ireland Awards. And Joanna is currently Head of Internal Communications and Culture at Teamwork. So good morning, Joanna. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for having me on your show.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you very much for making the time. And we have guests from all over the world. So tell us, for our listeners, tell us where you are in the world at the moment, Joanna.
I am based in Dublin, in Ireland. I live in a little seaside town by the Irish Sea with my husband and our 4-year-old daughter.
Oh, lovely. Fantastic. Excellent. So anyway, I mentioned a lot about your career, clearly massive amount of experience. So tell us a little bit, anything I've missed out in your career, but also more recently, what's your current role? Tell us a little bit more about Teamwork and what that's all about, please.
I have worked in communications for a very long time, mostly specialised in internal comms. And I just love it. Like, I really love it. I think in particular, I love like the closeness that you can have with your audience. So if you want to get any feedback or suggestions, sure, your audience are right there. You can talk to them, you can have a conversation, you can have a focus group anytime you want. You don't need to commission a big public survey, just have a chat. And I really like that allows you to be iterative and constantly getting better.
Yeah.
So I currently work with a tech company called Teamwork. So Teamwork make project management software for agencies that do client work. And Teamwork is such an interesting organization. It's quite small with just 350 employees, but they work across more than 25 different countries. So we have
Yeah.
employees all over the world and in multiple different time zones. And Teamwork calls itself a remote friendly employer.
Yeah.
So lots of people, including myself, we work fully remotely. Other people like to go into the office here and there if they prefer that. And some people work in little co-working hubs if they live nearby to other employees. So there's
Yeah.
really lots of choice and flexibility.
Fantastic. And I know you are really passionate about remote work and how to run internal comms effectively in a remote environment. And I know that's a challenge that a lot of organizations are wrestling with at the moment, not only internal comms, but the whole remote hybrid working. But tell us a little bit more about your philosophy, your passion for that, and some of the ways that you're finding to run internal comms in that sort of remote hybrid environment.
Yeah, so I started working remotely when COVID hit. So I was working as head of internal communications with the Irish National Police at the time.
Mm, mm,
And of course, police officers can't work from home, but desk based civilians can. So I went home with the laptop in March 2020, and really, I never went back to the office ever again. I just totally fell in love with remote working. And even when it was at its worst, like it was forced remote working at the start, it was very limited collaborative technology. I didn't have space at home for a proper office. The childcare was closed, so I had a young child at home. And even in those circumstances, I just loved it.
yeah.
I loved having kind of more space and time for deep work, less interruptions, fewer meetings. And so my love of remote work is now really guiding the focus of my career. Like
Mm.
I'm really passionate about the impact and the importance of internal communication in an organization where people are working remotely or in a hybrid setup.
Mm. And is it the? I mean, is it? And I know this is a kind of a really interesting at the moment. I'm kind of listening to these conversations that I'm hearing my clients having around this. Is it that you still see a place for some face to face work and remote, but you really love remote, or do you see a time, or would you want to see a time where it's feasible? Obviously, because as you said, with the Irish police and with kind of other environments, it's just not practical for everybody to do that. But where it is feasible, that we should be 100% remote, or what are your thoughts on that? Where do you stand on that, Joanna?
No, I would never be dictatorial about that because
Mm,
some people love remote work. I
mm,
really love it. I'm quite an introverted person. I'm a
mm,
little bit older. I have a family. I live outside the city. It
mm,
suits me.
mm.
But probably if I was 21, before I was married, before I had a child, and I was living at home, I probably hate remote work if I was told I had
Yeah,
to do that. So I
yeah,
think it's all about having the choice and having
yeah.
the flexibility rather than telling people you must do this.
Mm,
With teamwork, if you prefer to go to the office and have that social time, do
mm,
that. If you want to work fully remotely, do that. So it's all about the
mm.
choice.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I agree. I was talking to a client yesterday, and they're moving some of their people to a new office, and they're still, but whilst at the same time recognizing that a lot of their people are going to be working hybrid. So that they're really, it's really interesting because they're partly in the kind of trap of having the conversations about what color walls will be and what sort of furniture and all the kind of things you would talk about maybe 3 or 4 years ago before the pandemic. But they're also recognizing that actually it goes beyond that. And actually, we need to recognize that we need to change the workspace. It's not about just recreating what we've had in the past. And they're looking at creating, areas within the office where it's kind of a focus zone, where there's a collaboration zone. I can't remember what the other one was, but almost like, if I want to focus, I go in that area, and I know, well, no one's going to come and bother me. It kind of begs the question, well, why wouldn't you just do that from home anyway? But that's the way they're looking at it. And then obviously, if you're up for being kind of interrupted, and you've come into work today in a collaborative frame of mind, and that's what you're planning to do, then you go and sit in that area in hot desk there, and people know it's okay to come and talk. And I just thought it was quite an interesting way of zoning it out. I know it's probably doesn't come it's not going to be as simple as that, because you'll get people who can't sit in the quiet area, so they have to go and sit in the noisy area, and they don't want to be bothered. So it's sort of, I'm sure it'll take time to bed in, but I guess in terms of internal comms for remote workers, I guess there's a sense of, there's kind of clear differences. But what's your take on, how is internal comms different in an organization where people are working remotely, whether that's 100% or 50% or whatever? What are your thoughts on that, Joanna?
I think it is different and I think it needs to be different. I mean, if you're
Mm,
talking about an organization with lots of people fully remote or an organization with hybrid, so you're in and out, it
mm,
has a huge impact on how you communicate with employees. It needs to have more thought and design and intent.
mm,
So, if you think about focusing at work, like you need to be able to focus to get your work done on time and to a high standard. But we know that your focus can easily go if you're interrupted or you're distracted. If someone knocks on the door or
mm,
picks up the phone to ring you. So, in theory, remote working gives us more opportunity to do this deep focused work because we're not physically in the office. There's no one knocking on the door, no one popping in for a cup of tea. But actually, unless your internal communications are designed well, they can act as interruptions to this deep flow work. And often what I see is that people don't give intentional design to synchronous and asynchronous communication, which is particularly important if you're in an organization across multiple time zones. So let me just explain what I mean. So if you're talking about synchronous communication, it's where people are communicating in real time. So you and me, Craig, are having a synchronous conversation right now.
Yeah.
We're both on at the same time. And generally, people default to synchronous communication. It's just easier. It's more comfortable. You don't need to plan it. Everyone's heard that. Oh, I have an idea. Let's jump on a call. So, like a video call, getting a coffee, a town hall, any of that is synchronous communication. And the nature of this is that you have to be on at a certain time. You have to give your attention right now so it can interrupt your day and your work. But it doesn't have to be that way. Just because synchronous communication is easier to default to, you can design it differently and you can make an intentional shift to asynchronous communication, which is going to become increasingly important over the next few years in companies that are promoting remote or hybrid working. So in asynchronous communication, you don't need to be on at the same time and you don't need to consume information at a given time. And it can generally reduce the amount of interruptions to your work and that you get more of that kind of deep focus work done. So, for example, a digital newsletter, blog posts, information on your intranet, emails, instant messages that don't expect an instant response, pre-recorded videos that people can watch in their own time when it suits them. They're all examples of asynchronous communication. And
Yeah.
I think for me, it's really about designing the balance. You can't just have asynchronous all the time or synchronous all the time. So you need to really think about what the purpose of that communication is. Like if you're doing a performance review, you really need to have a real-time conversation. But if you're just sharing information, that probably doesn't need to be a meeting. You could write that down.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting, and going back a long time now, sort of into the depths of my career when I used to work in factories, and I used to work with one of the. I didn't work in internal comms; they didn't have an internal comms department, but I worked in learning and development, and on the periphery of what you might think of being internal comms if it existed in the organisation. But we used to do lots of. One of the roles I had was to find out how people found out about things, and we used to do these sort of audits of going to sites and talking, running focus groups and talking to people and saying, one of the questions we used to ask is, how do you find out what's going on? And it was always really interesting because. And we used to ask the same question to the plant management team, and we used to ask the same question to the people who worked on the factory floor. And the plant management team, we asked them, how do you think your people find out what's going on? And, it was like newsletters and notice boards and, kind of all the kind of team briefs and all that sort of stuff. And then you ask the people on the factory floor, how do you find out what's going on? It's like, in the canteen and in the break room, in the smoking room or wherever it was. And it was interesting to see that difference. And the interesting thing was that, the wrong channels were used for the wrong things. So the stuff that really people needed to hear face to face in a team brief because it needed some explanation and nuance would go on the notice board, and people just used to walk past the notice boards and never even look at them because it usually was they're either going to or from their break and they wanted to maximize the amount of time they had there. And also then the team briefs were used for stuff that was really it was stuff that was on demand. You would go and find it if you needed to know it, and actually you didn't need to tell me that. So it was always really interesting, and that was back pre emails. In fact, it was that long ago. So yeah, I do think it's interesting how organizations sometimes don't understand the difference between the two. So can you give me an example of some of the stuff that you've been doing recently? Because I think it's a really good way of framing it around synchronous, asynchronous. I think it's like the difference between Netflix and watching the old sort of TV that you used to have to watch when it was on, unless you had a video recorder, isn't it? So, what are some of the ways you've made that shift and got that balance right in the work that you're doing at the moment, Joanna? It'd be great to hear some examples of that.
I love your example there of the Netflix versus the TV. Like, I can't imagine now watching something with a big cliffhanger and waiting a week to find out what happens next.
And
I mean,
not
it's
binge
crazy.
watching. Yeah.
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 So let's talk about an example of how you might move from a synchronous piece of internal comms to asynchronous. Like, what does that look like? So
Mm,
in teamwork this year, I did an internal comms audit. I just joined the company in January. So I did an audit to really, like what you were saying there about that plant, like really understand how people are receiving information, how they want to, what's working, what's not.
mm,
And one of the overall themes that came out of my recommendations is that we need to move more towards asynchronous communication rather than synchronous,
mm,
and in a very deliberate way. So, one practical example is when I joined the company, there was an all hands employee meeting every single Thursday at 3 o'clock for half an hour. So,
mm,
every employee was expected to be online at the same time every week. And the purpose of it was to share updates from around the business.
mm,
But when I did my audit and I talked to a lot of people about whether this call was effective or not, there was quite a mixed response. So a lot of people told me that it was interrupting their afternoon, but the value they were getting in return wasn't really worth it. People in different time zones told me it was difficult to join. It could be an awkward time of the day for them. So, for example, if you're in Spain, you might be collecting your child from daycare at the end of the day. If you're in the US, you're only just starting your day, so it's kind of interrupting the flow of your morning.
mm,
And interestingly, some employees also told me if their first language wasn't English, they had difficulty with this synchronous call as the main method of finding out about what's happening because Irish people tend to speak quite quickly and they had difficulty kind of keeping up. It was just a
mm,
verbal update, there was no written summary. So, through no fault of their own, they were missing some important updates.
mm,
So, if you look at that meeting as an example, firstly, it's really expensive. It's 350 people, half an hour a week. So that's a huge cost in terms of lost productivity.
mm,
It's not effective. Lots of people
mm,
told me they were kind of only half listening and kind of half doing their work. It doesn't suit people in different time zones, and it's not very inclusive as people are struggling keeping up when it's only verbal.
mm,
I looked at all of this information, I looked at the purpose of the call, and I made the decision to end this weekly synchronous meeting.
mm,
So instead, it's being replaced with an asynchronous digital newsletter. So the purpose is exactly the same. The purpose is to share what's happening around the business, but people can consume it in their own time. You don't have to be on at Thursday at 3. You can read it on Thursday morning if you want, read it on a Friday night if you want.
mm,
And it meets the needs of my audience far better. Now, in saying that, I'm not culling synchronous calls completely, but instead of doing them once a week, we'll do them once a quarter and
mm,
we'll raise the bar in terms of the quality of the content. So, once a quarter, we'll have a quarterly kickoff, which is leadership updates focused on the business strategy. So,
mm,
it's a higher level of content and it also makes it a little bit more special. You know, if something is once a week, it's all the time, it becomes very normal.
mm,
Once a quarter is a bit more gravitas, it's a bit more of an event. So
mm.
that's an example of taking a shift from something that's synchronous to asynchronous.
Excellent. How do you? Because I guess, and I totally get that, and that's kind of aligned with what I was saying earlier about my kind of prehistoric example that I gave you. But in terms of I guess sometimes from my experience, why people say, well, we need to have a meeting, we need to have a meeting, because they may not read the news there. There might be something really important in there that's like need to know, but because we've left it to them. Because I guess the thing with asynchronous is there's I guess it links in with the degree of trust that there is in the organization as well, to a certain extent, to trust that people will consume that and will absorb it. Whereas at least if I know I've told them, I've kind of admonished myself of my responsibility, I've done what I was meant to do, and it's then up to them to do something with it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Joanna? Because that's sometimes what I hear coming back from me about when you try and abolish these meetings that have become kind of almost sacred, that you can't end them because we've always had them, that sort of thing. What's your thoughts on that?
I think this goes back to exactly what you were talking about when you talk to people about how they receive information and how they want to. You need to
Mm,
understand your audience. It's comms
mm,
101, isn't it?
yeah.
You need to know how people want to receive stuff. So Like when I went out and talked to people, for example, we have an internal chat tool here, and we had a really busy, it was called Company News Chat Channel.
Mm,
And the idea of it was that important updates would go in there and you could kind of keep up to date really easily. But it
mm,
wasn't really working because everyone would just reply to everything. So the CEO might put something important, and then you'd have 150 people replying, going, "This is brilliant, this is brilliant."
mm,
So news was lost. So I knew that that channel wasn't working. I knew
mm,
that the online call wasn't working. And then again, the beauty of your audience is right there. You can workshop it with them. Would you read a newsletter? Would this be useful to them? And
mm,
also, when you're launching these new channels and effective ways of reaching people that you know will work, you need to be able to test it and measure it. So if you can get
mm,
metrics, say on an open rate, or run focus groups to see what's working, you need
mm,
to make sure that you can evaluate that properly. So
mm,
again, it's about internal comms is all about avoiding assumptions. I
mm,
know that not everybody will read the newsletter. Probably 70% is the highest open
mm,
rate I could
mm,
expect. So you need to look at an omni-channel approach. What other channels are people looking
mm,
at? What
mm,
is the effective way? And there is certainly stuff that you would want to cascade through line managers in face-to-face meetings.
mm.
But it's about having that good channels matrix in place so you know what goes where.
Yeah, very, very much so. Very much so. Um, so we've kind of advocated asynchronous and the advantages of asynchronous. So we've probably got people listening and thinking, sounds interesting. So what are some of the tips that you'd give to an internal comms manager, advisor, support director who's looking to say, right, yeah, I recognize that we asynchronous is probably the right way to go, given the fact that, and particularly as you said, with more and more remote working, and we want people to be able to use that focus time and not be interrupted and having to, back to back endless Teams and Zoom calls. Some simple tips that someone who's listening can sort of pick up and run with.
Yeah, I think I'll give you two. One is around instant messaging and one is around meetings.
Mm,
So if you have an instant messaging tool, it might be Teams, it might be Slack. Um, the way that you use it and the way that you instruct your organization to use it can either set the expectation that it is a synchronous tool or it is asynchronous. So
mm,
I often see people will send me an instant message and they might say, "Hi, Joanna, how are you?" Or, "Hi, Joanna, can I ask you a question?" And
mm,
then they don't say anything. I might not see that for 2, 3 hours.
mm,
So they're using that as a synchronous tool. They're expecting me to reply immediately. Well,
mm,
actually, if they said, "Hi, Joanna, my question is XYZ," on the understanding that I might not see it immediately, but when I do
mm,
see it, I have all the information I need and I can get
mm,
back to you.
mm,
So instructing people in the way that they use these instant tools, that it should be asynchronous, and the way that you craft these messages is a really simple way to start.
mm,
I think as well, if you work in an organization that has lots and lots of synchronous meetings, which I think is probably every organization in the world, you
mm,
could tackle this as an internal comms campaign or project. I mean, you can sell this to your leadership team through a commercial lens, because meetings are so, so expensive. But people never really think about the cost of them,
mm,
appreciate the time sunk into them. If you want actually some data on this, there's a brilliant tool online, which I've been playing around with this year, called the Gathering Effect. And it has a meetings cost calculator tool on there.
mm,
So you can put in like how many people are going to this meeting, how often are they going, how long do they stay there, and the average salary of the person that's going in there. And it'll pop you out a figure to say, well, did you know
mm,
actually having this meeting once a week is costing the business 10 grand a month or whatever it is.
mm,
And I often think, Jesus, there's so many meetings. Everyone says it. That meeting could have been an email. But
mm,
that doesn't happen unless there's an intentional design behind
mm,
it. So
mm,
if you think about the purpose of a meeting, say, for example, a team that might meet on a Monday morning for an hour, but the purpose of the meeting is just to share information, that probably doesn't need a meeting.
mm,
So you could instead use a shared document where every Monday morning, for example, the expectation is by 11 a.m., you'll have all gone into that document and written down your top 3 priorities for the week.
mm,
And then after that, you could pop in at about 12 o'clock and have a look and see, oh, Mary's working on this, Stephen's working on that. Oh, that's quite interesting. I'll talk to her about that.
mm,
That doesn't take an hour of your synchronous time. that's a couple of minutes of your own time. And I suppose the bottom line of all of this for me is that communicating asynchronously when you can is ultimately more respectful of someone else's time. I think
Mm,
that's what it comes down to for me.
mm, mm. Yeah, that's really, really, really interesting. I'm going to ask you a question around, I guess, the elephant in the room for a lot of organisations. It never ceases to amaze me that I've run a couple of workshops for clients over the last couple of weeks where it's been, we've been looking at what their kind of big frustrations are, and it's still, after all these years, it's still too many emails still comes up. And so you mentioned email in passing earlier, and obviously we're in the age of you said instant messaging and things like that, but email is still, does a lot of the heavy lifting, I think. And I see a lot of organizations where they're still not clear whether email is asynchronous or synchronous, and I believe it's asynchronous. But they still, like you said about your instant messaging, they still expect instant replies. People will, again, I hear people who, I'm working away and I see the email pop up, and because they don't turn off their notifications and it pops up and they see it and they see the subject, I know, my crikey, I must go and read that, I must respond to that. And again, they're broke. It's that kind of sort of disruptive element to when you're in the zone and when you're really focusing on something. So I know, as I say, I know things have moved on, and email is still is relatively old tech now, but it's still one of the predominant channels that organizations use. What are your thoughts on that? I guess you're going to say, yeah, you agree. Hopefully you agree, or I'm assuming you agree it's an asynchronous tool. But how do we educate organizations to treat it like that and actually also use it in the way it should be used, and not just CC all and bombarding people? And I see people with hundreds of unread emails on their iPhones, which really disturbs my OCD. But yeah, what are your thoughts on email? Because I guess that's the that as I say, that's still a big thing for many organizations anyway.
I think I love this question because email is fascinating. It's easy now in the world of all these new tools and shiny gadgets to disregard email, but it's still so prevalent. And there's lots
Mm,
of research to show that actually over the last number of years, um, email usage is increasing. It's not decreasing. It's kind
mm,
of the opposite. Again, it's going back to assumptions. Don't assume that email is irrelevant. It isn't. And often you see these annual kind of studies come out that show that email is still one of the most important channels in businesses and that
mm,
people rely on it more than ever. I completely agree with you that email is an asynchronous tool,
mm,
but again, it's about how you are communicating out to your organization. I mean, it's a tool. How do you use this tool and setting
mm,
the expectation and the clarity around how to use this? I mean, I
mm.
remember being back before COVID, I remember being in an office working on something, and someone appeared at my desk and said, I just sent you an email. Did you see it? Like literally, they sent it and then they walked over to me. I was like, no, I didn't. So there is, it's a difference in understanding
Mm,
of what this tool is for and how to use it. And sure, isn't that what an internal comms function is for? Is to create a shared understanding in the organization, whether that's about how we communicate or how we deliver for our customers or what our strategy is and how we fit into that. So I think there's a role there for a good internal comms team to clearly, first of all, understand as a business what are we using this tool for and what are the
mm.
expectations, and then to communicate that to create that shared understanding.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Just sort of moving on then, sort of sort of bring to conclusions. All right, I know at Teamwork that we were talking about this before we started recording. You have this big event, internal comms event every year, which you call the Grand Council, where you bring together your employees together in Ireland for the whole week. So that seems to be, we've been talking a lot about asynchronous. That seems to be a really intentional use of synchronous time. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's interesting, just to talk about the other end of the spectrum, which is something that's purely synchronous, and what the purpose of that is, and how it works, and how you get the most out of that time together.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what you said earlier about, would you want some face to face time? The answer
Mm,
is yeah, you would. So every
mm,
year, Teamwork invests in a full week in the summer where every employee around the world is invited to come to Cork. It's the only time of the year when the whole company is together in person. So it's really important to the leadership. It's really important to the whole organization. And the event is a really great example of being very intentional to design synchronous time that is worthwhile. So, like, think about the cost of not just bringing everyone to Ireland, but the cost of essentially shutting down the business for a whole week. It needs to be really worth it. So, what we do with this time is we set some very clear objectives of what do we want to achieve from this week. So, these include aligning employees around the business strategy, building relationships and connections face to face between people who otherwise never meet, collaboration and problem solving, and of course, like having some fun. That's kind of the teamwork vibe. And how the week works is I basically would take these objectives and I'll chunk them up into different days. So, although the whole week is quite enjoyable, the last day of the week is a kind of a no work, just fun day. So, we'll have a teamwork festival in a field, we'll have inflatable games and team races, food trucks, and a DJ. It just gives people that space to just be together as colleagues, relax. You can't really do that online. And the rest of the week is more focused on work, but you can also design this to be enjoyable and memorable. So, for example, I mentioned one of the objectives is around aligning employees around the business strategy. And look, that sounds really boring. Like, what employee in the world has ever enjoyed a strategy day? They're usually really dull, full of jargon and PowerPoint and graphs and flip charts. You're tired by the end, you're overloaded with information. But again, it doesn't have to be this way if you take time to design things. So personally, I like to steal a lot of ideas from TV shows. They have really smart, creative people who know what they're doing. So at Grand Council this year, for example, when I wanted to align employees around the business strategy, I really didn't want to do a whole day. I didn't want to fly people from all around the world to sit in PowerPoint presentations all day. So instead, I took the same premise. I want people to understand the strategy, but I invented a talk show called Teamwork Live, which is basically a rip-off of the David Letterman show, even down to I made a set that kind of looked like his, got a big couch, big desk, a big skyline backdrop. And the employees were the audience. Our CEO was the host. He welcomed various guests up onto the couch. It was all about conversations and not presentations.
Yeah.
And then again, there was a bit of intentional design around, we've flown all these people in from all around the world. I don't want them to just sit and listen all day, because that's, even if it's entertaining, that's hard going. So we built in kind of bits of audience participation, stuff for them to do. So at the end of the day, for example, you usually do an evaluation. You say, do you now understand the business strategy? Yes or no? And everyone goes, yeah, but you don't really know. So at the end of this day, what I got people to do was to work in teams, and I gave them a news reporter challenge. So basically what they had to do was they had to pretend that it was the end of the year. Teamwork had just made a big announcement about all their strategic achievements for the year, and they had to record a 60-second news segment that would go out on RT or BBC News. So really what we're doing there is they're having fun, they're getting involved, they're chatting, they're working together. But I am then able to watch these videos back and test to see, what did they hear from the day that was important? Did our messaging land in the way that we thought it would, or did they misunderstand something? So again, a lot of pre-work and design goes into this. But I suppose the bottom line is, if you are spending time and money to bring people together in a synchronous way, it has to be worth their time, and it has to be worth the business investment too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're preaching to the choir on that one. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me how many of the, I remember it from my corporate days, and it's for a lot of organizations, it's not moved on a great deal. As you fly, as you say, fly people in or bus people in, whatever, an inordinate cost, and the venue costs as well. I mean, people don't actually realize how expensive these places are to hire as well. And then we just sit down and just show them PowerPoint slides all day, and they just sit there, and gradually it's like by the end of the week they're just exhausted, not because they've particularly been engaged, it's just because they're knackered from just listening to all these endless presentations. And it's like, it's kind of what we do is we produce for organizations who haven't got people like you who are really creative, we create board games and things that we can help them to bring this, their strategies to life, and get people interacting with it and getting their hands on it and touching it and feeling it and talking to their colleagues about it, rather than just sitting through 900 PowerPoint slides and just, kind of going in one ear and out the other. So I'm totally with you on that. It's a huge missed opportunity, I think, a lot of the time, and big frustration of mine as well. But that's a brilliant example, though. I love your creativity there, and I love the idea. I've seen. I once did something for a client that was done in the style of. This isn't particularly novel, that kind of Dragon's Den thing where people were going in and kind of pitching an idea that they'd got that they wanted the business to pick up on. And, the dragons were really friendly, but it was a really good, and we had an audience, and they would be able to ask questions as well. And it was just a really good idea, a good way of getting people to sort of do that, rather than just something that, again, it was just anodyne and sort of dry and boring. It's always great when you can bring that stuff, I think, to bear. So brilliant example.
I totally agree. And just watch TV shows. There's tons of good
Yeah.
ideas there. All these quiz shows. A really interesting one that you could do is, what's that show where they do two truths and a lie? So you could have two true facts about an organization and one that's a lie, and the audience has to guess. So again, you're learning, and there's good business messages there, but you're also having a bit of fun, and it's memorable. People will remember it. That's the trick.
Absolutely. I love that. Well, look, I mean, we've been through some really amazing stuff there, and I think that highly relevant. I think the whole asynchronous, synchronous thing, I think people kind of get what that is, but I think what you've done there is you've really helped us to start to think about, it's not just about knowing what it is; it's about knowing what each approach is suitable for and what it should be using for, and it's having that kind of really sort of strategic and analytical and using data to help sort of back that up, but also knowing your people and knowing what they need. And I think you've given us, Sue, great examples of also where asynchronous comms can be improved, but also on the other end of the spectrum, your example that you've just given us there of the Grand Council, I think it's a wonderful example of synchronous comms. Just before we wrap up, any final thoughts or tips, Johnny, just for the audience, just to kind of maybe some takeaway tips to help them on their way?
I think if you're interested in this, there are growing resources available. There's a community called Running Remote. There's a company called Remote. There's lots of growing links, groups on LinkedIn that you can dive in. I really think that this is going to become a bigger and bigger part of our life going forward. I mean, you can see from all the research coming out and news reports, people want the flexibility. Remote work is not going away. And remote work doesn't have to be full-time remote work. Some people like to go in now and again, but we can't communicate the way that we used to. It's not going back to how it was before. And when people talk about, how do we recreate those water cooler moments? Well, maybe we don't want to. Maybe we don't want to rely on people hearing rumors to find out stuff at the water cooler. Maybe we take the time to intentionally design good communication systems and structures that can reach people where they are.
Fantastic. That's a great place to finish. So that's brilliant, Joanna. So look, where can we find out more about you? Are you happy to be, kind of approached for people to? I've got your LinkedIn profile potentially to put into the show notes. If you're happy with that, is that okay?
Absolutely,
for people to reach out to you? Yeah.
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so drop me a line. I'd love to chat.
Yes, absolutely. And also you mentioned a couple of, I can't remember, I didn't write them down, but you mentioned a couple of things just there about resources that people can potentially access. So could you maybe send me the links through to those about the remote working?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll put those into the show notes as well. So people, if they're listening to this and they're out on the run or in the gym or walking the dog, they can kind of get back and find those when they get back. That would be brilliant. Well, look, Joanna, that's been absolutely amazing speaking to you. This is going to be going out early next year, or as we're recording, so early 2023. So I guess I should have wished you a happy new year belatedly or prematurely at the beginning. But I wish you all the best for the coming year. And it sounds like you're doing some amazing things. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your fantastic experience with us, Joanna. Thank you so much.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks so much. I'm really glad we finally got to do this. This is great.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.